AKAM lecture, which is a series of talks on the less known figures of early 20th century social reform in Kerala. Of course, it is unfair to describe that part of that period as one of social reform alone, because because we witnessed a very, very complex churning of society in Kerala at that point, which threw up a number of key figures whose thought and practice remain relevant to present-day challenges in Kerala. Alleppey Vincent is a very, in fact, a little-known figure, and I congratulate Bindu Menon for having done serious work on this particular figure of who needs to be remembered as the founding figure of Malayalam cinema. Bindu Menon is with the Azim Premji University. She is a long-time cultural researcher who has focused on Malayalam cinema. Research on Malayalam cinema is currently a very fruitful area, and Bindu's contribution to this area has been quite significant. I do not want to delay her more. Bindu, please, over to you now. You have 45 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Devika, and thanks to CDS AKAM lecture series for this opportunity to think about, Alleppey Vincent and sort of deepen the conversations around some of the early history of cinema in Malayalam. In general, I have so much to say about the history of Malayalam cinema, or let's say the lack of it, and as Devika suggested, not just Alleppey Vincent, but so many other figures of early Malayalam cinema remains to be explored in detail yet. What I'll try to do is to make use of the biographical details of Alleppey Vincent to thicken our conversations around film history, social identity, and alternative imaginaries of cultural production in early 20th century, mid 20th century, and so on. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. It doesn't have much in terms of images, etc., precisely because of the lack of material. But there are some of the biographical details that I have scanned and made part of the PPT, just for sort of some kind of reference to the conversations that are unfolding here. So thanks again, and I'll begin my presentation by sharing this PowerPoint. I guess it's visible, and can I move ahead?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I begin with the Alleppey Vincent is one of the figures, one of the or let's say that kind of omnipresent people in the figures in the history of Malayalam cinema, and I have come across quite a lot in the archives. And my focus is not particularly on Alleppey Vincent in general. My larger work looks at a history of early 20th century film exhibition, law and legality, questions of violence, census and history in and the formation of publics in early 20th century Travancore, actually. So Vincent is kind of I would say that that's a constant presence in many of the major film formations of that time, and it's kind of difficult to summarize him partly because of the nature of, nature of film work at that time, more like artisanal production, loosely organized, and so on. It's difficult to find, to sort of call Vincent either, or either as an actor or as a film entrepreneur, etc. I mean, it is his roles keep shifting as his work moves on, and partially this is because of the nature of the film industry and the nature of film work. And I'm hoping that this is useful. This attempt here is useful for early film history scholars in general, but also particularly to situate both larger systems and key individuals as important players in the formation of early local film economies. And so my desire is to kind of join a range of recent scholarship that engages with the relationship of cultural policy to labor, to space, and political economy. I would think of this attempt as a very modest one to explore these intertwining relationships of how, from a B category exhibition circuit, the Malayalam, I mean, if you look at the biographies of, let's say, K.V. Kochi, N.J. John, etc., who are early Malayalam distributors turned producers, they all would describe this particular area, which is the Malayalam speaking areas, as appearing as the Kerala area, or the Malayalam distribution area, etc., in film industry terms, largely in South India and in India. This I'm talking about the period from roughly from 1920s to 1950s. So it's also through these, laying out of these relationships, what I try to do through this biographical details, think about how a B category exhibition circuit became a film production center by 1950s, and the divergent strands of industry imaginaries that constitutes this kind of a landscape. There's also a transactional history between entrepreneurial communities, film industry figures, and politicians, as we will see, who collectively vied for a local film economy in Travancore. Now, centering on this kind of biographical material, I want to go through this interlinked modes of social identity, film commodity journeys, and diverse imaginaries, as I already described. So, to begin with, who was Alleppey Vincent? You can read the slide there, and it's quite a kind of a poignant, quote from Sebastian Paul, who wrote not something he himself wants to call a biograph, but rather a kind of a memoir, kind of a homage to someone whom he really admired, called Alleppey Vincent, Malayalam Cinemayude Snabakan, right? The saint prophet of Malayalam cinema. So Vincent's labor, as I said, can be found strewn across the history of Malayalam cinema. And at a time when film labor was an undifferentiated segment and lines of work were not clearly demarcated, you see Vincent as assistant director, actor, script coordinator, set designer, cinematographer, at one point producer, and later the studio manager across studios in Madras Presidency, in the princely state of Travancore, and modern Kerala. Now, among the many such firsts, Vincent might also be the first film actor to file his nomination papers for an election as a Congress candidate, and this is the 1948 Travancore Legislative Council elections. An attempt which was thwarted by the maneuvers of the Diwan of Travancore, C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, which is another history altogether. So we see, as the slide shows, and I'm going to, actually Professor Mani had reminded me that this should be a slideshow, and I'll just quickly shift to a slideshow. Okay, these are the two, the first one talks about his importance. The second is about the first short, which is the film Balan, 1938. where, the first shot where a Malayalam word was spoken was with Alleppey Vincent's character as villain in Balan. So, and here is Vincent's filmography, which starts in 1938 and ends in 1984. And this looks like a very, if you were to just look at the films in which he acted, or in prominent roles, or as as an assistant director, and so on, you would see, or a script writer, you would see we have only a small number. But as we start looking into the details of his life and his passionate relationship with cinema and his constant efforts to kind of push the boundaries of filmmaking to newer and newer kind of regimes, we will quickly realize that it has been an attempt, which is more than this handful of films that he was legitimately, or let's say that visibly, part of. Out of which two significant efforts by him is that is the formation of Udaya Pictures in 1947-48 in Alleppey, which is the first studio to be formed in the Malayalam speaking region, or let's say in Travancore, and also later, which becomes part of the history of modern Kerala. And the second is 10 years later, in 1957, to attempt the first, to create the first, or form the first cooperative sector film studio, the Ajanta studio in Alva, with government support. So to quickly, get back to some of these, the details of this, I would also like to go back to the question of film production in the Malayalam region, to get a sense of why does Alleppey Vincent's attempt becomes rather important in this map of Malayalam film history, is precisely because of the nature in which the Malayalam film industry was organized. Or let's say that there wasn't any particular industry to be called thus in this period that we are talking about. The motion picture industry here was created through three vertically linked activities, of course, production, distribution, and exhibition. And in any given year, from 1930 onwards, hundreds of movies of various genres and cause, with different levels of popularity, were produced and distributed to local theaters and exhibited by various other language cinemas. And this means this would include Tamil, Hindi, later Telugu films, and a lot of films from other countries. The emergence of film industries and industrial concerns from the late 1940s to 50s is thus a decidedly worthy and rewarding subject for re-examination as part of the revisionist interest in formative years of regional film industries in India. A study of their operations and films not only sheds a great deal of light on the economic and industrial conditions and cultural and aesthetic practices of Malayalam cinema in the period after Second World War. Now located in a very small regional market with some circulation in metropolises of Malayali migration only from 1950s onwards, like Bombay, Pune, Madras, Calcutta, Delhi, and occasionally in Singapore, Colombo, etc. And recently, that from 1950s onwards, we have enough evidence to say that Malayalam films circulated in the contemporary Gulf Council countries as well. But their fortunes before this time was tied more to small scale and localized historical and industrial determinants than the macroeconomic and historical forces that guided the decision making of the integrated film industries that we see in centers like Bombay and Madras. So I'll briefly outline the history and development of several film productions, aborted attempts, attempts to make studios, to write scripts, efforts to create distribution networks, etc. before the terms and subsequent tribulations of a studio system started emerging in the late 1940s. The structure of this film distribution in the Malayalam region of the Travancore, Cochin, and Malabar, with the emergence of sound and permanent theatres, is also reflective of economic practices that are determined by the region's lack of sufficient capital and for film production. The so it's this Vincent's early years. If we were to go to his biographical, details, he's born in a Latin Catholic family in Alleppey. He's a brother of the well-known, theatre person Sebastian Kunyu Bhagavathar. He himself was quite active in nationalist politics. Was attending the university in Trivandrum. He was a law student who abandoned it, and he left it in the middle of his law education, and left for Chennai. And there are many conflicting narratives about it. But part of it was his interest in cinema. He did not leave for Chennai with a very clear plan that he would join the film industry, but film is always in the back of his mind. A small reference somewhere also tells that in his younger years, he was also quite a proficient and very highly acclaimed narrator in the silent film cinema exhibitions in the town of Alleppey. Now zoom to Madurai. On his way to Chennai in the train, he's accosted by Sundaram Pillai, the who was originally an engineer in a shipping company in Colombo, but who was also a pioneer because he, consumed by this desire to make films. He had interned with the film studio in Colombo and has arrived and joined the modern theatres in Salem. Resigned his job as an engineer and joined the studio in modern theatres in Salem as an assistant director, where he was in conjunction with, in collaboration with the Malayali Society of Madras. He had written a script of Vidiyam Mrs. Nayaram, which is Fate and Mrs. Nayar. He met Vincent on the train. Vincent joined him in modern theatres. And what was seen as a script which is no longer fit to be made into a film, it's Vincent's effort, as we understand, to produce a Malayalam film, and he could initiate the Madras Malayali Association, which is mostly, working class immigrant Malayalis who funded what was called a Kairali Talkie film, but he could enter into conversations with them and buy the rights for the script, bring the film to modern theatres, and that's the story of the first Malayalam sound film, which was born in 1939. So Vincent is actually very crucial, along with others, the Malayali Association, the Kairali Talkies that they formed, and the and Sundaram Pillai, who were interested and who were actually in a way yearning for Malayalam to be heard on screen. And Balan was interestingly a creation of the moving labor in film production in the early decades of the Indian subcontinent. And Vincent actually describes this in a very wry manner. He says the dialogues for the film ended up with twisted tense and verbs for technical reasons. Except for the editor, Mr. Varghese, all the personnel at modern theatres were non-Malayalis. A Tamil producer, a Karachi-born Sindhi director, M.S. Natani, a Punjabi sound engineer, a German cinematographer, Felix Bayes, a Marathi makeup man, and Telugu and Tamil assistants. So this is, this kind of tells us also quite a bit about sorry, yeah, okay. So there is a request for annotating, and I accepted it, and it seems like So is my PPT still visible to everybody?
Yeah, it is visible.
It is visible. Okay. Okay, so but this is of course the very well known film poster for Balan. I just want to quickly move and show you some of the descriptions from Sebastian Paul's book. So which is about the kind of huge reception that Balan received in the in Kerala. So this is a small anecdotal reference by the later well-known Tamil film actor Muthaiya, who talks about a big crowd receiving Vincent. And also, I mean, I have read elsewhere also the other the main lead actor, Mr. K.K. Arur, who were received with much fanfare in the Darbar Hall ground in Ernakulam.
No, Bindu, you were frozen for a moment. That's why.
Ah, okay. No, I was just describing what is there in the I mean, giving a little bit of a detail about what is in the slide. I think I can move ahead. I think it's fine. So, right. So, so most of this information particularly comes from Sebastian Paul's book, but also I don't have a copy. I have only my notes. There is also an autobiography written by Alleppey Vincent called Innalegal, which is quite helpful in thinking about it. So this is. I just want to locate the importance of Vincent in various aspects of this particular production. Right from sort of leveraging various aspects of the film production in the unit to make a Malayalam film, reviving a script, to even finding. So he came back to Kerala to find the actors. This is described across various biographies. And he found actors, he commissioned actors from who are basically associated with various theatre groups and college theatre groups, etc., including his brother Sebastian Kunyu Bhagavadar's troupe for the production. So having established that, I want to take a quick step away from this to think about what was Malayalam film exhibition at that point of time. So in 1937, the 30 exhibition centers in the region had an average of 35 rupees collection per day, wherein Balan fetched an advance collection of rupees 25,000 from theatre owners as an advance, before the film started screening. And a Madras-based company called Shamala Pictures distributed the film in Kerala. And the huge success of Balan actually also led modern theatres to produce a second film in Malayalam titled Nyanambiga, where the crew was repeated, which constituted similar kind of characters, but a different cinematographer who was Marathi this time and not Felix Beers. And this is an interesting period because the interwar period was a decisive one for the development of the international film industry. And this adds to our understanding and complements the growing body of work on, everywhere around India. It also illustrates that the extent to which long-standing and recurring trends and patterns can be tracked back, to this particular era of film production. The modern theatres went into business during the interwar period, and the production of Nyanambiga began in the first months of the Second World War, which would prove to be a decisive one for the future of the Malayalam film industry. We don't actually have a film, after that for another 5 years. As we will see, the modern theaters and Vincent occupied a significant position within the Malayalam industry for several years, initiating and riding out many of the developments and the tumultuous events of this period. During the war years, however, several factors combined to reduce the advantages of Madras as a center of trade. The war caused a multitude of disruptions too, and restrictions on the movement of goods from, ranging from food to films, which is known to everyone. The British government legislation introduced during the war also affected the future of Madras as center of film trade. Wartime duties and tariffs were introduced for a variety of reasons: to raise funds for the war effort and to prevent potentially explosive cellulose nitrate film stock being captured by the enemy. Film was considered a luxury item, and duty became payable on prints, negatives, and raw stock. And this is very elaborately discussed by K.V. Koshi in his 1968 autobiography, but it's something which you see across the Indian subcontinent. In the early 1940s, there was still a large population of independent rental firms, as well a number of bigger region-wide distributors such as National Pictures of Koilon. However, the second half of the 1940s saw the increasing consolidation of the rental sector into the hands of a relatively small number of large distribution companies. Many British traders have also found it more profitable to obtain and distribute other language films, primarily Tamil and Telugu films, in the Malayalam distribution region. Despite this, the end of the war also heralded an economic boom, which supported a renewed flurry of production activity. I know that I am among economists who would perhaps know much more than I know about other goods and other commodities in the region. It was also, at least in the case of cinema, can be described as a period of very unfounded optimism, during which new guard of producers expected to start afresh and depend on new try new forms in cinema. So the distributors also started to recognize the need for wide distribution to remedy the financial imbalance and create an infrastructure for domestic supply. As overseas market and overseas influx of films started shrinking. On the whole, insufficient capital was invested in Malayalam films. This meant that a strong slate of films could not be built up, and that the production values of these films were also so low than those of their main source of competition, which in this case was Tamil. Block and blind booking made things increasingly difficult for Malayalam producers. So Malayalam, the whole Malayalam region was generally seen as a kind of, a dumping ground for B-circuit Tamil films, or second prints, or very run-out prints of Tamil and Telugu films in this period of time. So this, to quickly, so I would just try to summarize this in these two sentences, which is the kind of difficulty in making the Malayalam film market a robust and a vivid one, but rather something which is at the receiving end of other films, that too films of what you call low reproduction quality. There was an increasing trend towards production, as I'm saying, towards this time. And production units started emerging, or at least it's started, in paper, started emerging at this time. This also developed the role of rental firms, who were often well equipped to persuade exhibitors to take their product. I mean, one of the good examples is Geo Pictures by NX Xavier, which becomes really prominent after 1951. I'll come back to that, probably to that question later. But what I want to, now piecing together scholarship on the region, which is, from economic history, fundamentally, one also understands the source of the nature of, how the transfer of capital from agricultural and plantation sector to other industries happen at this time, post the Second World War, though at a marginal rate. And cinema seems to be kind of a site where at least some of this interest start emerging. Some of the tardiness of this, efforts were also compensated by the benevolent princely state. This particular, this is just a small segment from autobiography of N.J. John, who talks about how the Travancore Forward Bank sort of, granted and supported the film distribution company that they launched. Okay, so the late 1930s and 1940s thus also witnessed the emergence of such a large number of initiatives which were to act as catalysts in the evolution of a commercial film industry in the region. When post-war circumstances became more productive, and this is evident in the number of establishments that come up. In 1939 is Bal, and 1938 is K.V. Koshi setting up his film distribution company. This was also closely followed by other initiatives of similar kind. As I said, Geo Pictures in 1939. Swami Films, owned by K.S. Akhileshwar Iyer, again around the same time. T. Vasudevan in late 1950s, etc. So all of these rental firms, which were established in the late 1930s, starts gathering, more momentum, more, becomes more. Rather than becoming rental firms, they start acquiring full capacity of distribution companies, etc. towards this time, towards the Second World, the time after Second World War. Internationally, both during the silent and sound eras, exhibitors were also organized into runs. So as I was saying, that Malayalam, region was seen as more a kind of, zone for poor quality circulation of poor quality of Tamil film to be circulated. There's also films were not concentrated, but were also individually, but in blocks. So many of these measures which came up during this time, they were seasonal. They were also had to go into block booking, had to accept blind bookings, etc., which all made the exhibition industry kind of put them in under very difficult and very strict kind of contracts with the Madras production companies. As a result, the exhibitor also became the sole residual claimant for profit by paying a flat fee for each day, or the film company could become the residual claimant by hiring the exhibitor for a flat payment. So, I mean, it would incur quite a bit of loss for most of these companies. In the first half of the 1930s, the Tamil film companies also seem to have ensured sufficient input from the distributors by charging a very flat fee. So as noted by many scholars, these kind of formal contracts plaguing the smaller industries, smaller distribution regions, etc., do not determine the salient aspects of the motion picture industry, because the motion picture industry elsewhere is all about what kind of production, what films, etc. And one should also remember that at this time, the Madras industry is quite dominant. And if we were to look at just Madras, the kind of images that we get are very different from when we are looking into the relational contracts emerging in the Malayalam region. So, and there are, but the post-war times actually is one where there are more Malayali entrepreneurs and things start changing. I wouldn't go into the details. I said all of this in order to understand the kind of very chaotic, unruly, and sort of muddled nature of film circulation here, and what did it mean to produce a film at that time. An important intervention at this time in the post-war period is, or at the cusp of it, is a rather interesting film made by P.J. Cherian, the dramatist and also artist, who made Nirmala in 1946, which was made through a joint stock venture, where he solicited the prominent members of society to buy the shares, hoping that this would, two things. One, of course, he was also hoping to create a cinema which is outside the logic of the capital, but also attempting to create public accountability for the capital. And after much deliberations and support from friends, so there is a desire for a good film, but there is also a desire for a clean capital, and a viable kind of film form, that, as we see in his own biographical kind of descriptions. Cherian also thought that this is a moral duty, that he elaborates upon this, and shares that the economic premise of a more general agenda in cinema reforms in the post-war entertainment economy. So that's what, in his description, this is the kind of desire that he holds. Vincent is somewhat different, and I would like to, sort of situate Vincent slightly differently from Cherian, because his efforts to create a film, to make films in Alleppey, and also establish a film studio, comes from other sorts of impulses. And I'll just quickly elaborate on this. It's so Vincent, T.V. Thomas, and others, and who's later joined by Kunjako, found this permanent. Their desire was to create a permanent production house named Udaya Pictures in 1948. The first studio in Kerala with sound recording facilities. If we go to I just quickly move to this photograph. It's from the Indian Express archives. But this is what. This is what Alleppey Vincent had to say about this, because he was rather clear from his experience of working in the Salem industry, that in modern theaters in Salem, that there needs to be a kind of organic link between film production, film aesthetics, and so on. So he starts working towards creating something like this. And this would also, quickly summarize the kind of difficulties of working with other in a different language context, in different language, with a multilingual crew, and so on. This explains the kind of difficulties, everyday difficulties involved in making a Malayalam film in a different context. So this transition from a distribution region in film industry lexicon to a film producing region warrants more than an economic explanation. Neither is it something like a teleological path. To reflect on this, then, I want to turn towards insights from other disciplines, particularly history and anthropology of commodities. It's also at this point of time, as it's evident, Vincent is joining forces with long-term friend and communist leader T.V. Thomas, who subsequently brought in necessary capital from other like-minded people. And while working with two major Malayalam film productions at modern theaters and with film industry personnel from other regions, Vincent also seems to be convinced that a search for Malayalam film aesthetics has to emerge from vernacular capital and geographic and political reference. Vincent's fervor prompted the development of a locally situated film economy. A series of some very wealthy men, including lawyers and so on, formed the investor base for the project. a lengthy newspaper story at that time disabused readers of the notion that local film production was merely a diversion. And I'm quoting, it is distinctly a business, a serious manufacturing, money-making business. A small group of Alleppey men were shrewd enough to see it, and a close company was formed. In theory, Udaya Pictures represented everything a local film studio could ask for. The company was both a tool for placemaking and business development, funded from outside but locally, and became a valuable asset for turning Alleppey into a center for film production, at least in their imagination. However, Uday also lacked fairly important elements to create a self-sustaining film economy at that time. In the process of building its stature among local businesses, it lost its connections to region-wide distributors and financiers that would invest in a film cluster. As would become evident in other cities at this time, elsewhere in India, trying to seed a film economy, civic boosterism may encourage local incentives for film production, but it alone could not sustain production industries. Vincent drew from his experience of working in Tamil studios and industry to establish the studio. And he got his German camera cinematographer friend Felix Bias, who worked with him at Modern Studios. And the studio was created in a 15-acre land, which was donated by Kunjaku. The first film that Udaya produced is interestingly a documentary called Swami Sharanam, which perhaps is also the first Malayalam documentary. Vincent, who by then had learned cinematography, operated the camera in Shabarimala. And there's an interesting description of how this was achieved, given the fact that all three of them, including Bias and Kunjaku and Vincent himself, were Christian and wouldn't have been able to enter the place, and how they navigated these difficulties, and finally Vincent could shoot. The first film that Udaya made, Veli Nakshatram, wasn't a huge success, but it launched Miss Kumari, who is supposed to be probably the first, or is often described as the first, remarkable actress of Malayalam screen. If what I'm trying to do is to populate these biographical details with historical knowledge of how commodity journeys happen, and what does it mean to actually to understand a figure who navigated different industries, navigated different lines of work in film production, initiates various kinds of production efforts, etc., and how would one locate this? And I suggest a relatively unexplored concept in Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities. Anderson deploys the term journey, first developed by anthropologist Victor Turner, as a meaning-creating experience. In Anderson's analysis, his examples, especially a pre-modern period, are pilgrimages and journeys of officials and statesmen between cores and peripheries of rule. And he uses it to understand the development of nationalism, basically in East Asia. However, the idea of journey and circulation along well-developed routes, which circumscribe as well as brought together diverse people into common purpose, can be used productively in this context. Since the beginning of film circulation, a large number of film equipments, film companies, showmen, and increasingly, distributors started traveling between different centers and peripheries of the world. This journeys has brought into existence a massive network of men, money, and film commodity. Vincent's journeys, I would like to locate in this larger framework, and has been particularly productive in this exact sense. Vincent's journeys into Center for Production in Tamil Nadu, working at modern theatres, and his maneuvers around many of the aspects of film production, thus leads us to the first and the second sound film in Malayalam, right? And also his initiation into cinema coincides with the phase of language cinema developing in South India, And as the decade proceeds, the journey starts creating far more powerful interests which identified far more closely and found far more meaning in the new administrative units. This identification with the fuzzy contours of a distribution region is not imposed, I would like to think, when I look at these details and the ways in which it emerges, but perhaps generated by the journeys and circulation of people and commodities, people like himself, and the film commodities in all its diversity. And it is as much a political as it is an economic and commercial journey. The meaning creation, thus I refer to, is not just in an ideological and cultural sense, but also signifying political and economic qualities. Now, so as I said in the beginning, it's difficult to write a history of cinema without an understanding of this less integrated kind of industry, which is constantly fluctuating, with less capital, and so on. And so after the first, the within quotes failure with Pelli Nakshatram, in fact, Vincent actually leaves for Chennai to act in probably one of the first multi-starrer and a multilingual film, which is made both in Malayalam and Tamil simultaneously. But it's also perhaps probably the first big budget film in Malayalam called Jehovah in Tamil, which casted N.G. Ramachandran as its lead. The film took 3 years to produce, and Vincent was the chief villain of the film. The film also, because of its luxurious set creation, etc., Vincent also became the set designer and kind of assistant director and manager of the set as well. And this was widely acknowledged and also seen as a very prominent contribution on his part, particularly to the less studied genre of biblical mythologies in South Indian cinemas. He returns and he finds that the kind of arrangements made when Udaya was formed has fallen apart, and the Udaya Studios, it's a whole different history in which the other partners of Udaya Studio lost it to Kunjako, and it became a kind of a private individual enterprise. 10 years later, in 1957, is perhaps his most important intervention, which is to start again a film production unit, and also a studio. I mean, one of the impetus of this new formation that he imagined was, on the one hand, to be able to imagine the ideals of a cooperative movement in a fast and rapidly privatized kind of enterprise like cinema, and through all his experiences of working with different theaters, starting a film company himself, he is increasingly convinced that film production need to be determined, need to be understood outside or need to be taken outside the expansive logic of market. So he again finds worthy collaborators in Alway, but also worthy collaborators and worthy supporters in the recently elected ministry, like T.V. Thomas, who finds much value in the project, and the government leased land, in Alway to the company for establishing it. And there was also a generous loan from the from the government to establish the cooperative studio. The cooperative studio, I mean, now what is at this point, his desire is to again, after a decade of establishing Udaya Pictures, Vincent also arrives at this, realization, the way in which Malayalam film industry, which has grown in the years from 1948 to 1957 in an exponential manner. If there were only 8 films between 1930 to 1948, there are a number of films released after 1950s, after the the new linguistic state is formed. And at the same time, what he sees is that it becomes a industry whose production center remains Chennai, especially for the post-production work and lab work and so on. So, and this is where he imagines, again, this coordinates of a cinema, which is at the same time both political, economic, and aesthetic, to be located in Kerala. And this seems to be the kind of driving force behind this imagination, this utopia of to be able to create cinema outside the expansive logic of market, which he starts feeling very strongly about, determines the nature of this new creation. But unfortunately, it also comes across various kinds of challenges of a technological nature. Most of the commentaries on Ajanta Studio, including that of Sebastian Pauls, the actor Madhu, etc., have mentioned that it was a well organized space. It was a friendly space to work. It was a space within Kerala, but it also lacked technical finesse, or couldn't catch up very fast with technical finesse of the Madras industry. And unfortunately, there were also huge losses incurred from a huge fire during the shooting of one of the first films. But what is interesting to think about, Vincent at this point, is this increase, is how him, and also let's also say someone like PJ Chirian, imbues this conversation, the discourse around film production, not only limited to market and profit, but starts abstracting cinema into an aesthetic citizenship. And this coincides with attempts to reform various aspects of cinema, including production distribution, developing codes of conduct for cinema halls, demanding new tax laws, organizing film as an industry, and re-evaluating stardom itself. So this reform agenda is only in parts about aesthetic sensibilities and about form. It is also equally about reforming the institutional apparatus of cinema, which meant reforming it from a network of small operators in production, distribution, and exhibition to an industry made of formal and modern economic organizations. Shift temporary theaters to respectable middle class cinema halls, take it away from the unbridled and uncontrolled kind of private market forces to more centralized and integrated kind of state-owned production units, etc. So that's a larger discourse around film industry, which we see as both criticisms and as utopian imaginations, etc. At this point of time. If you look at journals like the Cinema Journal from the 1950s onwards, there are several essays which look at alternative kinds of film production happening in China, in Russia, and other parts of the of Eastern Europe, etc. So this is a very strong embraceal of cosmopolitan imagination, but also kind of a rejection of certain aspects of it at that time. I see Vincent taking part in this kind of a conversation through this particular, formulation of cinema outside the private market, and cinema, in a responsible cinema, which is to linking it to ideas of public good, and so on. In a good example of what went into such a definition, utilizing the well-known analogy between social class and ticket pricing in cinema halls, appeared in efforts to educate the class of cinema goers, which was happening all around. So, in short, if we take the larger map of Malayalam film history, um, we can see that Vincent's contribution arises from, not in I wouldn't say that he comes into film production with a very clear ideology or a very clear framework of what cinema means, but rather his biography becomes interesting because it parallels both the technological and cultural history of cinema itself, right? It's unorganized modes of production. It's undifferentiated lines of work. Its rather peripatetic nature into something which is more organized, something which is private, but something on which there is more interest from the citizenry itself. This, I think, is what is also makes him an important and interesting figure. And before I end the talk, I also want to point out towards his personal relationship with a very dynamic relationship with both theater and cinema that he comes from his Latin Catholic background. And here I'm also interested in thinking about the relationship between technological modernity and caste itself. If we were to look at the histories of theater, if we were to look at the history of cinema, and let me stick to what I know better, which is the history of cinema, one can see a figure like Daniel, for example, J.C. Daniel, in the 1920s, who's a predecessor to Vincent, and others, who brings a new global form into the vernacular context, embraces the new, not just the new idioms, but also new social relations that a technological modernity can engender in bringing marginalized caste figures into his production, and so on. And that history is well known to everybody, where it leads, etc. An interesting parallel between both Daniel and Vincent also seems to be precisely this kind of, as I said in the beginning, the effort to stretch the boundaries of, what film production, or let's say cinema allows, or let's say the field allows, and be able to imagine the unimaginable in a collaborative manner. If Daniel was a lone figure who was trying to kind of stretch his passionate utopian imagination of cinema into a vernacular context, what we see in Vincent is someone who is all through his career, who remains a collaborative. I mean, his ventures are collaborative in nature. Right? He works with a set of people all the time. He seeks, when he's seeking local. He's trying to situate film locally, film economy locally. He's moving towards bringing in local elements and local capital into production. When he's establishing a cooperative venture, he's doing the same, etc. So I would like to end by saying that this also his biography has to be located in this larger history of technological modernity and the caste communities which come into various parts of film production, and there would be very many other figures to be studied in this manner. But in this interlinking nodes of social identity, of commodity journeys, and coalescing with personal journeys, creating national and transnational and translocal kind of relations in the film industry, is something in which I would like to locate Alleppey Vincent's work and his life. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Bindu, for that, very exciting and thought-provoking set of thoughts. It is very new to me. I must say that though I have read a little bit on Alleppey Vincent, the way you put it, I think, brings a lot of insight to whatever little we know about the early days of Malayalam cinema. And I'm really glad that you stress the fact how he tried to shape the film industry itself, not merely the themes. Now the floor is open to questions. We have some time now. We have around 20-25 minutes. So please ask the questions directly, or if please ask questions directly, or you can also type it into the chat box if you so wish, but it might be good to directly ask the questions.
Ask a question?
Please do, Gayatri.
Yeah. Thank you, Bindu. Fascinating talk. I don't know much about the early days of Malayalam cinema. I teach film history here. But I was wondering, what do you see as what has changed? What changed in Kerala society between the failure of this poignant enterprise that you just described, and what later happened with the extremely successful cooperative movement called Chitralekha, which actually produced Swayamvaram and Kodiyatam and all the series of award-winning films in the 60s. So what had culturally and sort of socioculturally and logistically and economically changed between this early failed, really very heartbreaking story that you just said, to when we come to the 60s? What had changed?
Should I answer it, or should I take other questions as well? Devika?
Shall we collect a few questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Anyone else? If not, if you're still thinking, can I ask one? I mean, I want to ask you about how this experiment that you just described was gendered. Was it a gendered experiment, or if it was gendered in some way, what way was that? And because I'm asking you, because we see that Malayalam cinema still carries the mark of extremely feudal gender relations, at least. I mean, the gender relationships are very, very, even if the work relationships have maybe become more democratic, in the sense that technicians do not have to go and beg the producer anymore for payments, etc. Gender relations seem to be highly feudal. So what really went wrong? And we, as Gayatri pointed out, we have something like Chitralekha in our history, which changed the very, very, made a very, very, very important intervention in changing both form and content of Malayalam cinema, taking it away from purely commercial motives and so on. So what was really that, is there some way we can discuss this in the context of Alleppey Vincent's early experiments?
Yeah, so there are two questions. So I mean, something which changes, so when I look at Vincent's film, I mean, he's making all these attempts and trying to push boundaries, etc. But the films that he imagines, that he himself imagines, in whether it's Udaya or whether it's the later in his own in Ajanta Studios, are mainstream film productions, which again, while he's deciding to take it out of the the logic of the market, the films themselves were kind of deployed in this within this. Within the same market, right? So, whereas by the time Chitralekha is formed, as histories of film society movements, etc., show, Chitralekha is also a kind of a logical follow up to the emergence of film society movements and the kind of films that they, that the film society, the film aesthetics and the film taste, let's say that the taste making efforts of the taste making aspect of film societies have started taking roots by the time a Chitralekha Film Society is formed, right? Whereas, Vincent's efforts precedes that kind of larger change in the cinema publics. And also it doesn't imagine a kind of infrastructure for distribution, which is outside this, right? So it still is catering to mainstream film imaginaries in terms of the films that they're producing, and has to be circulated through an infrastructure which doesn't share it. Whereas by the time Chitralekha's films are produced, there is also a much better, film subsidiaries by the government. There are also, distribution systems which have emerged outside that, and so on, which I think was very crucial for their success. Did I answer you, Gayatri?
Yes. Thank you so much. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I'm sure that Chitralekha must have, I mean, you can never really discount these early experiments to at least propose an alternate sort of a gestalt in how to, and I think that is exactly what I was wondering, and I think you just explained it. I think they, the fact that the kind of films that they were trying to make were meant for these large mass markets, and whereas they did not really have the production and distribution capabilities to kind of wield the whole thing. So it makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Devika, thanks for the question. And at this point, in this time that I talk about, from the 1920s to 40s, it's there are hardly any women who are not actresses in the industry, and if they are, they hardly appear in any literature on cinema, right? So, I mean, I remember you yourself has pointed out some of these, film magazine conversations where questions are asked about what is an actress's actual job, right? So, what is the similarity between an actress and a nurse? I mean, these are the kind of imaginations. It's a highly contested society around gender roles, particularly in that in those very transformative years of Kerala modernity. You know that very well, and of course, cinema also reflects and refracts it in very important ways. Interestingly, I mean, these are again rumors and anecdotes. It is said that the engineer who worked in the modern theaters in Salem, his wife was a woman and who often helped her husband in editing films and so on. But there is nothing about her. It would be fantastic to have a somebody like her. So in film history, increasingly you find that when newer and newer archives and things emerge, one also finds women who were like Alice Guy, etc., who were major figures in big theater, in big production centers, women who were doing back end work, especially with film material processing, handling, etc., but also some people who had technological expertise. I still imagine that there would have been some people like her, and then we don't really know, right? So I mean most of the conversations around at this time are about actresses and actresses entry, where they come from, etc. Mostly from theater, and the kind of difficulties in entering the space of cinema. All of this, I mean, starting from Rosie to the personal history of Miss Kumari to several others. But it remains a conversation around this particular figure of the actress, or sadly the actress becomes the only actress become the only site of conversations about women in early Malayalam cinema, right? I mean, there could be other things, there could be other people, but they're hardly reflected on, right? I mean, it's also said that J.C. Daniel's wife was a very big support and quite an actively involved in the production of the film, right? In terms of managing the film space and so on. But she would never acquire the title of a studio manager, right? So so there are these snippets of these stories, and it would be really interesting to have that history as well with us, right? All said, it's one of the most largest new technologies, and which had such huge effects in the society. So it is quite sad to imagine that history without without a clearer understanding of gender roles in that industry, or even gender performances within that industry. Yeah. Devga, you're muted.
No, my question was really about the nature of work relationships. So,
okay.
I was generally asking,
Okay.
see, because you're talking about someone who's imagining cooperative cinema.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's quite fascinating, because it's again, there are no very clear descriptions of how it is done, but you certainly have descriptions of how many of these early films also worked in most industries, but also here. And in particular, I've come across accounts of how Balan was shot, which is that everybody stays in the same premises, rehearse as if they are in a theater, in a play production, where so very often people from the women who are otherwise mobile, who are already public women in theater, etc., are drawn precisely because of this, because they had to travel and so on. Travel outside Kerala, outside home, and stay elsewhere and so on. So, that's one. This idea of a public woman seems to be very much attached to all actresses, and they also, within the work arrangements, it is very often described as as a man's field, right? A man's domain, and although not in the very early productions where stardom has not really settled into it, Right. I mean, a very interesting kind of small snippet which I have seen with reference to to Vigada Kumaran is that Rosie and a friend of her would come to the film studio as if they would go for uh, you know uh, as if they are going to work in the paddy fields that they worked with, because they would carry their food and go to work. Right. That's a description, a small description I have come across. But of course, that changed by the time it's centered in studios and it becomes studio-based production, where this idea of public women and they're who are able to easily move between private and public spaces is established. I think it's when stardom gets more crystallized, and probably that happens first with figures like Tikurshi in the late 1940s, and Miss Kumari. I mean, for that reason, the first female star of Malayalam cinema. The stardom starts crystallizing, and it's when stardom crystallizes that all of this gets really differentiated with each other. Payment and salaries and all of that gets. I mean, it is also. I don't have any clear evidence for it, but it is. I won't be very surprised that in the late 1940s, if someone like Miss Kumari or B.S. Sarojah had more, had received more, wages, or I mean, it was called wages then, than had a better contract than some of the other actors, right, in the late 1940s. I wouldn't be very highly surprised if that had happened. But we have very few accounts of any of this.
Oops.
Hi, ma'am. May I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So, as we all know, the linguistic formation of the state happened in like 1957. So, Kerala as a region was not existent before that. So, when we're talking about films like Balan or Alleppey Vincent for that, I was wondering what was like the binding force that allowed for a kind of collective Malayali regional imagination at that time. And also, could you also comment about how much the Malabar as a region was also part of this journey of this kind of industrial formation? Because the south was the
Shonima,
major.
your call. Shonima,
Yeah, ma'am.
Shonima, I'm sorry. Your voice scattered in the middle. So can you please repeat that question, ma'am?
Once more, my video is not working properly. That's why I'm not.
I could hear.
That is all right.
Vedika.
And I'll
Oh,
repeat
okay.
the question, no problem.
I
So
heard
first,
the question.
Oh, that's okay. Bindu heard you, so no problem.
okay. So, ma'am, you heard the second question?
Yes, I heard the
Okay.
second question.
Okay. So
So
since
if I miss anything, you can remind me again. So okay, good question. So one, of course, it's not I mean, so I always emphasize the Malayalam speaking region, and not Malayalam cinema of 19 when I talk about Balan, right? And it's also a big question whether we call Vigada Kumaran a Malayalam film, or it was a silent film. It was made in Travancore. So there is that, and it's also sometimes claimed by other industries, as Tamil film industry doesn't mind making it, because Daniel was actually originally hailing from Kanyakumari. That has happened as well. So anyway, but what is really interesting is that in terms of as I was saying, that it was not called the Malayalam region, but it was called the Malayalam distribution region, right? And I think that distinction is really interesting to think about, especially when I was also trying to, although this was on Alleppey Vincent, I was also trying to think about how some of these also connected to how the film commodity itself kind of travels between these different states, etc. Very interestingly, I mean, one can think about the porousness of all of these boundaries very I mean, it's kind of evident in something like Balan, in that quote I shared with you, which is that it's not directed by, it's produced by a Tamil producer, it's directed by a Gujarati Jain, I think, it's edited by a sound by a Punjabi, etc. So it's not really a claim about there isn't any claim about it is mainly the claim about Balan being a Malayalam film by many who have many popular historians, and also in Malayalam film history in general, as the first film, is purely because it speaks Malayalam, right? And many language cinemas are defined like that. They become a Tamil film becomes Tamil film for the reason that, and by the logic that it speaks Tamil, right? So that was predominantly the reason why Balan would be called a Malayalam film. But again, it's an interesting question, because it is not just limited to, it's not really thought as, cinema cannot be thought really as something which is just happening on screen, especially at that point when songs are really important in creating a community of listeners. People flock to theaters reading the film publicity material and the film books and so on. So interestingly, Balan had I might have a photograph somewhere in my archives. If I could I will show it to you after I answer the question. Balan and even Yanambiga and actually some of this Prahladan, etc., had their publicity material printed both in Tamil and Malayalam, right? They had songbooks, the songs are in Malayalam, but it would be printed in Tamil, right? So a certain kind of multilinguality which actually came into existence, not necessarily because everybody wrote and spoke Tamil, but everybody had a very impressionistic understanding of Tamil language through both theater and cinema in Kerala at that time, right? Which is very evident if you look at the history of theater, like looking at early figures of biblical drama like Sebastian Kunju Kunju Bhagavathar or Andrew's Master or P.J. Cherian, etc. They all really talk about how there is a certain kind of affective public that emerged through sound and listening to music and songs, etc. So there was a presence of other languages very strongly in this public of that time as well. But although the linguistic state is formed in 1950s, mid 1940s is certainly the heights of the state formation demand, right? So the most powerful discourses arise at that time. Parallel to this, if we look at parallel to this effort to have one's own studio and so on, is also other kinds of discourses about let's just let certain kind of films not be here, right? Like not the Tamil devotionals be what is the place of Tamil devotionals in this scenario? Why are we listening to films with 30 Tamil songs in them, etc.? Are very very powerful discourse about crafting a Malayalam cinema, which is as a comparative project, right? This is what I'm trying to say, that it's one to say that it's the film speaks Malayalam, and because of that it's called a Malayalam film. But what is happening around it, right, to the various memorabilia, various kinds of publics that are congregating around it, etc., one can see that there is much more to cinema and much more to this description as a Malayalam cinema that's happening in that public at that time, right? So I don't know whether I answered your question satisfactorily. Is there a second part which I didn't answer?
Yeah, ma'am. The second question I wanted to ask was how much of Malabar as a region had its hand in this whole journey of this film industry form?
So, I mean, see, all the production for a very long time is actually Travancore based. That's also for one reason why I kind of, I mean, my work is focused on Travancore at that time, precisely for the reason that this is. But that doesn't mean that there is no cinema traveling to Malabar and there is no circulation in Malabar. Also, the two, the two units are their separate administrative units, right? It's one is a princely state and the other is under the British rule. So for example, if when Travancore and Cochin are really grappling with the idea of how to legislate cinema in the 1920s, in Malabar, it's not debate in those terms, right? Because it's made in the British center of rule, and it just is, applicable to all British presidencies, and it just applied in Malabar as well, right? So there are these distinct differences at that time, which makes it a very different kind of history, right? But there are quite important, events which happen in Malabar, which are filmed and so on. So there's currently an effort to find to locate the footage created by the British, shot by the British government during the long Mapla, rebellion, which is more than 1,000. 1,000 is probably a small number. Footage which is not of the rebellion and of the prisoners and so on, and their journey to the Andamans and so on. This is what is being described by there are small snippets of information around, but there is no film reel located. So Malabar certainly has a history, but as you see, that kind of a history is not probably would never have happened in Travancore, precisely because of the distinct nature of Travancore, right, and the distinct nature of Malabar. So I would say that a similar history of Malabar is yet to be written. I mean, that's also why I made very clear when I started talking about my interest in Alleppey Vincent is also how he worked across not just languages and industries, but also across different administrative units. He's trying to set up something in princely Travancore. He has worked in the Madras presidency, and then he is working on a cooperative studio system in modern Kerala, right? So
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question. I don't know. That's Mridul.
Hi.
Okay, does
Yeah.
anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask
Mridul,
a
all right.
question. Yeah. It's, I just wanted to know whether this, the whole effort of making the structure of the industry as a cooperative and things like that, do you think that could have had some impact on Kerala not producing, fortunately, unnecessarily huge, films with, crores as the budget, and so much it doesn't seem to have had a history, or even anywhere do we see something like that. So is it because the earlier attempts at filmmaking or at forming studios were by people like Vincent and all these, whoever were there? I'm not very familiar with all the history. Did it have some impact on, the nature of the films that were going to be coming in the future and which were being made at that time? So all those, with huge, what should I call them, amounts of money and, fanfare, and I don't know what all to call it. We didn't have that sort of a film industry. Is that something to do with their influence? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Thank you. So the latter films, actually, towards the end of 1940s, actually from early 1950s onwards, there seemed to be the effort to make actually big films. So the film that I cited, Jehovah, for example, is a very big film. Actually, it's a big budget film. It's Malayalam's big budget first big budget film, which is made by a Malayali producer. 10 lakh in 1952, I think it's released, but it's made. They're starting to make it from 1949 onwards in Madras and so on. So there is, the early personnel who was coming around films. In terms of imagining cinema, I think the market, I think they're still imagining it as something like a profit-making venture. They're really not thinking of it as outside those terms. And as I was answering, Gayatri's question, that could be imagined only when the better, distribution infrastructures emerge and government subsidies emerge, etc. So in the 50s, I would say their imagination is still within the logic of the market. But at the same time, the film aesthetics increasingly seem to be very much, determined by, various other kinds of, interests. There is, of course, on the one hand, socialist realist kind of interests. On the other hand, there are also various other sorts of, film genres and film aesthetics that is influencing Malayalam films. Actually, a very interesting work by Jensen Joseph, who looks into studio systems in the 1950s, in fact, calls it a kind of a bricolage work, because you will see the influence of Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, all of these in that time, which goes against the general understanding that it's only socialist realist films which made it. I mean, we think about, Neelakuil. If you think about just Neelakuil and let's say Chemin, they are two very different kind of films, in fact. Right? So, Chemin seems to be actually conversant more with, later film which is made in Bahrain, which is quite similar to underwater, photography and so on, which is slightly different. So there are, I think that there were various imaginations about cinema, vying, for space at that time. There are, biblical mythologicals. There are, films inspired by socialist realist kind of projects. There are also very clearly, more modern women oriented kind of projects. So there are several, but I do not think that the Malayalam cinema did not really go the question about, big luxurious kind of films with big budgets. That's perhaps less in the cinema of Malayalam in the 1950s. I mean, it's perhaps partially because of the lack of capital, could be an important reason, but it could also be because of very strong social discourse that emerges in the 1940s, which are, rejecting the Tamil film industrial kind of models and the Hindi film industry, etc. I mean, there was a very, there is a selective embracel of some and rejection of others. So probably, that could have had an important role to play. And I particularly remember this one particular piece of writing by C.J. Thomas, rationalist, who is quite, against the entry of a devotional like Bhakta Meera, right? It is into the Malayalam market, because he thinks that, not because he thinks that, it has a lot of songs and so on, precisely because he thinks that that is something which against, a rational foundation of a society to have devotional and piety and so on. So maybe all this, very, very contested kind of discourses of the 1940s perhaps has an important role to play in the, how cinema panned in the 1950s. That's how I would think of it.
Yeah, that's the sort of gut feeling one had, but I'm so glad you sort of said it. So.
Thank you for all those wonderful questions. But I think it is time. We are running, actually, we have taken 10 more minutes. I'm so glad that such a good discussion was possible on a figure who is definitely still very marginal to our imagination of early 20th century. So I'm hoping that with your publications, Bindu, there will be a much greater attention, the kind of attention that this figure deserves. I mean, I still find it hard to wrap my mind around the fact that we don't really think enough of the kind of contribution that someone like Alleppey Vincent has made to the form of the labor relations, the work relations, of course, which are very crucial to the kind of aesthetic production that it enables. That we have not paid enough attention. So thank you so much for suggesting, because I remember when I asked you about this AKAM lecture, you had, and in fact, I initially, if I remember right, I had asked you about J.C. Daniel. And it is you who suggested to me that this person, Vincent, is far more important perhaps, and only because he's so invisible. So thank you very much for correcting that, helping us to, urging us to see beyond the more familiar figures. Thank you all for all the questions, and I'm sure it has enriched this discussion considerably. So this a recording of this lecture will be available on the CDS website. In fact, we are hoping that has been our aim, to carry a series of lectures on the less noticed but crucial figures of early 20th century social churning in Kerala. So thank you all again, and I think we should close this meeting now. Thanks.
Thanks, Devika, CDS, and everyone for staying back. And
thanks, Bindu.
Thanks for your questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. How do I log out?